So actually today, our focus, Brad has done some research around the Teen or Youth Leadership Council in Missouri, and so he's going to share some of his findings. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brad.
All right. Well, thank you. What drew me back to Missouri was a chance to work with the State 4-H Council about 13 years ago. And I really loved that role. It was fun. And I always had this dream that I'd like to do research around it. So while I went for my doctorate of education, that was what I did my dissertation on. And that's kind of where this came from. And so hopefully you'll find some interesting things. This was about a third of the presentation. It would normally be an hour. I'm going to do it in about 30 minutes so that there's time for discussion. So buckle your seatbelts, but also please unmute and say, whoa, hold on, if there's something I'm blowing past that you want to see. So let's see really quickly. This is me. I work with Missouri 4-H. I'm a state youth development specialist and an assistant extension professor in HDFS. That's my smarmy profile picture, but I like this one better. This is when the council surprised me on my 10th year of being their advisor. And the council president to my immediate left and our right is now a colleague in Missouri 4-H. So really quickly, the objectives I'm trying to accomplish here are just to help you gain some insights or share the insights I've gained on how council membership and experience influences individual action, impacts self-perceptions, affects their ability to impact their surroundings, the world around them, and their abilities to really pursue their greatest interests and kind of achieve that thriving orientation, follow their dreams. So we know what a state council is with everybody here. They're kind of ambassadors, they're representatives. The exact job description varies somewhat, but these are some things, some common threads that probably weave through our programs. And we know that they tend to be role models to other youth at all levels. We know that the names may differ among us. Here's some examples that I've came across, but there's many more. And the study I did it was a qualitative study, so it wasn't a huge sample size. In qualitative work, you're not looking to generalize to a large population, so you don't need huge numbers. These had served from 2011 to 2013, 7 males, 8 females, 2 African Americans, and then 13 Caucasian members or alumni, and they're currently in their mid-20s. So I want to just talk about the approach here for a second. Picture in your mind a wood chopper. Everybody got the image? No? Yes? I can see you nodding if you do. Okay, good. Okay, here we go. Was this it? No. Okay, well, let's say we want to study this wood chopper. I cannot understand her perfectly because I cannot be her, right? I can strive to understand her by trying to observe her actions, but that observational understanding may not really be consistent with how she views her own behavior and work. So if I interview her, that can kind of give me some access to what her experience is. But if I really want to understand what the meaning is that she makes out of what she's doing, it really helps if I have some understanding too of chopping wood. If I have some knowledge and experience, that'll help me understand what she shares with me. And that can allow for stronger interpretation of that experience when I'm writing this up and communicating it. So with this in mind, I took an approach that's called hermeneutic phenomenology. And it's a specific kind of phenomenology that's really well suited for exploring highly contextualized experiences like a state 4-H council experience, because this isn't something that just all youth get to do. It's very unique. Hermeneutic phenomenology really emphasizes understanding. And sometimes we get this idea of what real research is, and we think it has to be representative samples and free of any kind of biases. And there's actually so many ways to conduct valid research. It's really amazing. This one emphasizes understanding, not just simply describing something. And it allows for the interpreter's own experiences to be useful in interpreting the data. So if you look at research in the future, I encourage you to take a look at hermeneutic phenomenology, because it really is a way of leveraging our experience as practitioners into the research that we can share and sharing your story with the rest of the profession. So the research questions for this study there were 4. Number 1, how did membership on the council influence individual actions while they were council members? Number two, how did it impact individual members' views of themselves? In what ways, number three, did the experience affect their abilities to make an impact in the contexts where they live? And number four, how did the experience really impact their abilities to pursue their greatest dreams and interests? Because I was going to swing for the stars here. I want to know the big picture. So here's what we found out: in phenomenology, you end up with themes. And so I had some themes that emerged from the data as I interviewed these alumni. Number one theme was encountering diversity. And what we found was in racial and ethnic contexts, I'm going to do something really quick here. There we go. This was often the first opportunity that these youth had to work alongside peers that were a different ethnicity than them. Most of them embraced it and found it interesting. Some came to council really a little bit nervous about the experience because they've never worked with anybody other than people who look like them, think like them, and vote like them in the past. So some felt trepidation at first, but there's some keys to success. And one of them was the non-white members. They tended to be, more often than not, the ones who are multicultural and bicultural. And they were leaders in kind of bringing people in. And I'll share a quote in just a moment. Also, event planning responsibilities. They had some key responsibilities as council members that really helped create immediate shared goals and a sense of camaraderie. So Johnny, these are all pseudonyms, said, I came from a rural area. Everybody looked the same, not a lot of diversity, gender, race, etc., but even political ideology and other things. But it's not just the white kids. Mossad, African-American youth at the time, said it was my first big introduction to rural America. And it struck me as odd because I could never fathom how anybody could live so far away from anything, That was my big introduction to farm and rural life. Same two people. I was asking about racial tensions, and he said, well, I think people generally wanted to get along because they had that united purpose, they had a cause. So, instead of having friction, it was like, we have a job to do, let's go and have a little bit of fun. And Johnny said one thing that really helped is what I mentioned earlier. Our African-American reps really helped to make communication a two-way street and not make it an us and them. So those with more cultural competencies took leadership roles. The interesting thing was I was expecting through the years different levels of racial tension. More often than not, the largest divide was between urban and rural cultures, not race and ethnicity. Grace had an interesting comment. She was first council meeting, white middle-class young lady is approached by another white middle-class male, and he said he doesn't really think that these city people have the same values as people from rural areas like me. And she says, I just didn't realize that people were weird about people from the city. And I'm not even like relatively diverse, at least from him. But that sense of different values and the divide between urban and rural was something that was kind of echoed throughout the different years. So the second theme was changes in context. And when we talk about context, we're talking about like your family, your circle of friends, maybe the clubs you're a part of, the social groups. It's similar to an environment, kind of flows through you. Members found that becoming a council member led to a sense of shared vision of what it was entailing and changes in how they were viewed by everybody else. And a lot of this probably sounds familiar to each of you. For those with a high level of 4-H dosage in their circles of family and friends and teachers at school, it was interesting that Rebecca says the parents would ask me questions like, how could their kid become a member of council? So she was definitely seen as a role model. Randall said some of the adults even looked up to me in a way. Now, for the people with not a lot of 4-H experience in their circle of friends and their communities, like Mossad, his teachers were like, oh, well, why are you on that? That's interesting, not negative or positive, just curious. And Annabeth was still to this day frustrated that some classmate who was part of a theater council got half a spread in the school yearbook. And she's saying, I was almost the president of Missouri 4-H. Anybody? No, that was very strange. The third theme was individual changes that took place within individuals. Membership did bring individual changes, including growth from the autonomy they had with their roles, a heightened self-awareness. Really said, yeah, I really kind of expected it to be a job description, a linear approach. There were some things they all had in common that they had to do, but she said um, they got to do it in their own personal ways. And they said in the end, it made us better officers because we could really tie into what our skill set is. And we know there's such a thing as the myth of the average child. Everybody's different. And the sciences of learning and development that we're hearing more and more about underscore that. Everybody has a different path. Everybody learns in different ways. And their role was really largely up to them to create within established parameters. You've probably all heard the fishbowl analogy from your council members, your youth ambassadors. He says, you're in a fishbowl. You've got a lot of eyes on you. You're aware of yourself when you go to the mall, when you go out to eat. In adults, he says, you're expected to be the leader and not do dumb things. They expect you to be a kid because you're a teenager, but they expected you to be one of the elite. So despite a sense of shared vision, it was really interesting. Everybody said, oh yeah, we all had a common vision of what being a state 4-H council member was. So I said, well, what was it? What was it like what was the experience of being a council member? What was a council member? They all described it differently. Some said that it's somebody closer to the youth, and they emphasized their relationship to the younger youth. Others emphasized that they were idea generators and they were there to get people excited and bring ideas, keep them interested. And then others talked about being a role model. But as Ridley said, each of us had a different role, really, because it was ours to create. Heightened self-awareness. This was interesting. You think about how much time they spend at a council meeting. And they probably spend, at least in Missouri's case, 4 or 5 weekends a year, and then a couple of events and some change. But that had a huge impact on where they lived all the rest of the time. Sorrell talked about how in his little town, the teenagers like to go and they have bonfires. They'd underage drink and they'd, have all sorts of things going on. And he said, if I wasn't on council, I would have done that. But since I was on council, I said, no, I don't really want to risk that. So I'm just going to go home. A huge impact in your local community of context, just from something that requires a lot less of your time, but it's so meaningful. We know that in the research on sparks, that sparks can be protective factors for this very reason. Theme 3, individual changes. We're still on theme 3. In the views of themselves, all of them describe changes in their lives that resulted from being a council member. And they had lasting positive impacts, and they got a lot of recognition, they got validation, and they were inspired and sources of inspiration themselves. And with experience, members viewed themselves as a leader. Their self-concept really changed. Mary said, it made me feel, okay, I can be a leader. I can be involved. And she went on to college and she got involved in a lot of different organizations. Rebecca said, it boosted my self-confidence because it made me believe I was a leader. And I believed that I could strive to do more things. That's also called self-efficacy. So the 4th theme was leadership. We'll just segue right into that. And this was one of the strongest themes. Being a leader, beyond viewing themselves as a leader, because so often we hear of this situation where people say, okay, you're a leader, you're our leader, you're going to go lead. Now, what color t-shirt should we get for this event that we're planning as adults? It's important to actually have leadership skills. And beyond viewing themselves as a leader, they did develop actual leadership skills through their experience. They understood the nature of leadership. It involved finding their own leadership voice, developing leadership strategies, gaining experience from making impactful decisions, not just t-shirt colors and things like that. Mary said that she learned that the leader wasn't necessarily the head honcho. And Brock said going in, he thought maybe it was like a micromanager. People have preconceptions of what leaders really are. And they found that, no, that's not really it at all. You're the person making sure everything's going straight. You're the one who, people just need to talk to sometimes. Some people need to be told every move. Other people like to be given a broad idea and use their own creativity, he said, and go from there. I was so impressed with the wisdom in so many of these answers. So as they found a leadership voice, they described a process of finding their place in a group of other leaders. Some found it really important that their voice was heard, but others saved their energy for issues that they were just really passionate about. But you have a group of people who are used to being the leaders in their community, and here they are, and they're all together, and not one of them's backing down, and everybody's expecting to be the leader. Some people found a behind the scenes approach worked better with them, but how they found their leadership voice was really different. And here's some examples. Taraji says, most of the time I was able to speak my mind because she really was out an extrovert. She liked to speak her mind. She said people would either roll with it, they would kind of switch it around a little bit, but I was always able to speak my mind. One of my favorite quotes is from Johnny, who said, sometimes you have to decide what hill you're going to die on. For me, Congress t-shirts were not the one. And then Rebecca said she wasn't really a leader on council because there's so many people wanting to be the main leader, but then she'd go back to her community, and that's where she was a leader. They found that there's a need to develop flexible leadership strategies. They had two events that they were primarily in charge of. One was teen conference, 11 to 13-year-olds. They did everything from planning it to teaching it to evaluating it. The other was State 4-H Congress, and they had less input into the design. It was kind of like plugging into an existing model. So I had this assumption that they were all going to say that teen conference was meaningful to them, Congress not so much. I was wrong. Some said, teen conference was really where we got to make a huge impact because I heard the word, it's our baby, or it was our baby a lot. However, many of them found Congress to be the more valuable in terms of career preparation, because they said oftentimes you are with people who you're their boss and they're your age or you're their age. And you have to be able to be friendly, but not cross that line. And, who else is going to be in a situation like these young leaders we work with on our state councils? So that really prepared them to be able to walk that line, be professional, have good relationships, but still be in charge. They also got experience in making impactful decisions. And they learned that oftentimes we devalue committees, but committees were where a lot of this development took place, these structural pieces of the experience. In a large group discussion, you're not going to have a lot of individual decision-making opportunities. In a small committee, you are. So Mossad said, it's about showing people it's not just showing people how to lead, it's leading by your actions. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a sec. In committees, they reported developing more of an awareness of themselves as leaders. They had to learn how to motivate other people who they had no power over. They had to develop strategies of how they were going to lead in the ways they wanted to lead. And they also got experience in planning, organizing, and strategic thinking. So they got a lot of work done, but Brock pointed out those individual times was where they probably learned the most about each other. I love this quote from Randall. It said, I'm the youngest of 5, so I always had people to look up to, never had to be the leader. And then he came on to State 4-H Council. He said, if it wasn't for that experience, I never would have gotten out of that mode of following somebody. I would have always been the sheep. Theme 5 is relationships. And in relationships within the council, they were always described as family style and lasting. There was expectations because there was this reputation of council that you will make so many lasting friendships. And most of them reported that the networks had endured. Most expected that any need for mutual support, if it ever arose in their life, were to arise, it would be there. And all left the experience with this expectation firmly in place. Now, at one end of the spectrum of how it turned out, you see in the bottom picture on the left-hand side, there's a young couple next to me. They got married. They met on council. They got married, and they're living very happily ever after. On the other side was Annabeth, who said, it was like, oh my gosh, you'll make so many, emphasizing so many lifelong friends. But the truth was she only made really one that was a lifelong friend. And she said it's not because they don't care, but because they're doing their own thing. And it's not that you don't matter. It's not that the relationship didn't matter. It's not that they don't care about you, but you can still honor and respect the relationship. It's just that you've grown apart because you weren't in constant contact and your lives went different ways. But that really kind of disappointed her. It stung a little bit. Another subcategory of the relationships was developmental relationships with people like us. They said you're likely to get a little bit more rope with things. People trusted you more because of their position. You have a pretty good relationship with your youth specialist, And the way they saw us, they said, may have transitioned from being just kids to being a young adult. Also, the relationship with the land grant university. Most people who came from rural backgrounds said that the university scared them a little bit. It was so big, and they didn't want to be in classes that were that large back when we all had in-person classes. But several of them said, I came here because of my state 4-H council experience, because they became comfortable with it. They interacted with the campus. They weren't scared. They knew there was people that could help them, and they developed that connection. Theme 6 was career preparation. And there were some specific skills. We talk about career readiness. There were some specific skills that they learned through their council experience that translated to career readiness. One was learning how to motivate others with no direct authority over them, with no money or control, recruiting others to your point of view, and empowering others to be part of the solution that you're pushing, backing up your position with facts and research, and pitching ideas in ways that resonate with other points of view. Those are some pretty impressive career assets to take into the working world as a young person. Johnny said it really helped me a lot, being able to get people to do things that need to be done, even when you're not the one that signs their paycheck. And it gets you ready, because these people came in and they might not have had any push to go to college from where they came from, but they look around, they see these 18, 19, 20-year-olds doing college, and they're like, oh, well, maybe I should look at that too. Here's what they're doing to be successful. I think I'm going to do the same thing. So there's a huge modeling piece of that. A huge piece of the career preparation was also diversity, working with diverse others, working together to achieve common goals over time. And a key dimension of this was people of different races and ethnicities, sexual orientation. It wasn't until the end of my tenure as the council coordinator that more youth who were gay started coming out. Before that, they would come out after they were off the council. And then just the urban-rural culture divide. So in this picture, there is a drag queen, a high school superstar, college superstar athlete, a high school principal, a photographer for the New York Times, and several parents. I'm proud of each and every one of them. One of them is a state highway patrol officer. He said, it enhanced my ability to be more open to people's thoughts and beliefs, not to look down on people. You do you, and if it's not affecting me or someone else, I don't care. He said, as long as you're not causing havoc, I'm not worried about it. And with all the law enforcement headlines in the news right now, I love that quote. The final theme was empowerment. Now, we talked about self-efficacy a little bit, which is your belief in your ability to do what you want to do with hard work. Empowerment, I use that construct to mean the ability of people to influence their lives and make that happen. So it was revealed by actions that they took to pursue their sparks, their directions they wanted to go in life, and align their life's trajectory with their greatest interests. And a great example of navigating towards your sparks was with Brock. He said, well, he shared that he had ideas of what life after high school was like, and he was going to go into woodworking, and it really wasn't what he expected. So he ended up going into real estate. But he says, I'm not going to move entirely off of woodworking. I'm going to go ahead and flip houses. So he went to real estate, but he's really going back to his sparks, because he can work with his hands, do woodworking, tear things down, build things up. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. All of these sample members pursued additional growth after high school. They didn't just graduate high school and quit. 2 of them went into like the police academy or real estate. 14 pursued degrees at a university or college. And many of them encountered adversity when they left high school. We talk about how we really prepared them for the world. And I was surprised at how many said, wow, I had a really tough time. One said, nobody really helped me understand that you had to go seek out your own opportunities, because in 4-H, we're really good at dropping opportunities in people's laps and bringing the opportunities to them. And she kind of had to take time and realize, oh, wow, I've got to go find this myself now. Nobody's going to bring it to me. And another one that was really surprising to me was Randall. He struggled because we're all about making a difference, making an impact, being a leader. And so he's in this career he loves. It's right really around his sparks, which is mechanics. But he's always asking himself, am I making a difference? Because we always ask ourselves that, am I making a difference? And how can I make a difference? And he's afraid that what he was doing wasn't making a difference. And he's kind of feeling guilty about doing something he enjoyed that wasn't making a difference. But then he started thinking, you know what? I'm on a power gen team, and that's what he does. He runs a power gen team for in Chicago. When a generator goes out in the hospital, they call his team. And he says that nursing home has all these people hooked in these machines. They have to live off these machines. Power goes out all the time because of the grid system, and that's why we work 10, 11-hour days. And when he started thinking about that, he said, you know what? It is a big, significant role. And that gave him the permission to follow his sparks and his passions that he wanted. And examples of career choices, I mentioned Randall, every one of them, they had things they were really good at and passionate about. They went on to find careers in those areas. The assets that really helped them were exposure to higher education, a relationship with their land-grant university, and so that connection to education, and a relationship building, networking focus that helped them build their peer relationships. Annabeth had an interesting quote, and she said she was in a really small town, maybe 11 people in her 4-H club, if that. And she said this was really her thing. It was the way she connected. It got her out of her area. It got her out of her house. She came to Columbia. That was a big deal to come to the campus. Those first, especially that first meeting, huge. And she says, having not had these experiences and not getting pushed to go to college, she said she probably would have babysat or washed and groomed dogs or something like that. And she says, it's not that those things aren't important and there's nothing wrong with that. She said, but I definitely prefer this. She has now wrapped up her master's degree in counseling. She has 2 bachelors, and she's pursuing the life she wants to live. So let's answer the research questions and wrap up. How did the membership on the council influence their individual actions? Well, through a combination of structural elements like committees, the code of conduct, the structures that were in place, higher expectations from those around them, and really a sense of shared understanding about the responsibilities and expectations of themselves and of each other. How did it impact their individual members' views of themselves? They begin to view themselves as leaders, and they gained a sense of self by finding their place in a group of leaders. They were influenced by that recognition, the validation from the adults around them, and the expectations from the places they lived and from themselves. In what ways did the council experience impact their abilities to make an impact in their lives, the places they live now? And it was really found in the growth and development of actual leadership abilities, things you can measure, forming relationships, building networks, developing effective leadership strategies. And they became more prepared for careers. They became more prepared by modeling from older youth who are already on those positive trajectories and getting experience working with others who are different than them. How did it impact their abilities to pursue their greatest dreams and interests? It empowered them with assets that help them build and navigate their careers in the directions that lead towards their sparks. They developed new skills. They grew in self-understanding. They experienced achievement with big, I mean, you're planning a statewide event. 300 of your peers are going to be there. You've got a $30,000 budget and you're 16 years old. That's huge. And they experienced that kind of achievement on big scale leadership accomplishments that happened with their ideas, their planning, and developmental relationships with adults. So today, 6 are working full-time in their chosen careers. The other 6 were full-time students at the time of the interviews. And then 3 were doing both. They were working and completed their master's degree, and they were all on paths that really satisfied them. Key elements were inspiration, learning to motivate others, experience with diversity, building the capacity to adapt, and experience working in teams. How did it affect their individual abilities to pursue their greatest dreams and interests? And we talked about career navigation again, the capacity to work alongside people who are different, and leadership styles and personality types who are different over a period of time. The time element is really, really important in current research. The ability to conduct their lives according to high expectations and be intentional and control their actions and be self-aware. They also develop the really tangible leadership skills we've talked about, like the ability to organize others, build networks, assess other leaders, and motivate others they don't have any power or control over. And they also built experience-based identities as leaders. They weren't just told they were leaders, they led. And they made decisions that were of consequence, and they built things and they accomplished things. So there's several implications we could talk about. Here's 4. One is, let's talk first, consequential decision making. Making meaningful decisions matters around things they really value. And it aids in the development of their leadership ability, their self-efficacy, and their sense of initiative. Engaging them as resources can also bring us programs that better appeal to the people we're trying to reach, those same target audience members. So what's the value of the membership? Well, it created a spotlight, for one, that raised expectations and amplified positive role modeling effects and impacts how members are treated by adults. We tend to want to say, oh no, we're going to treat everybody the same. And my suggestion here is that there is some value in having a status attached to being a council member, because it does raise expectations. It does make them more powerful role models. And there's a sense of belonging to something bigger. In the thriving research, that's called transcendent awareness, being part of something bigger than yourself. The trick is you have to really be careful that you create a culture of merit, not a culture of entitlement. So I first took the role, the sense was, oh, I've got this green jacket, I'm cool now, I can kick back, I made it. And it took 3 years to turn that around with youth involvement to where they were saying, okay, that means I work for them. Since they elected me, I have to get busy. So how do we harness the benefits of diversity? Well, councils must be representative of all the youth in their state, and membership policies need to be equitable, not merely equal. They need to support a balance of urban and rural if you have that, and they need to foster an environment, obviously, that's inclusive. Here's Missouri. Look at where the population is. Here's how our regions are laid out. And the red regions on either side, those are called the urban regions. We have 97.4% of our land classified as rural, where 30% of our population lives. Urban's 2.6% of the land, and 70% lives there. About 3/4 of them live in the urban regions. So about a little over half of the Missouri population lives in those red regions there on either side of the state. And yet at the time, we had three youth per region representing the state 4-H council. Was that equitable? Was that representative? Not so much. You look at the demographics. Where's the non-white population? In the rural areas, it was 8%. Urban areas, 25%. So I guess the main takeaway is the state 4-H council service can lead to long-lasting impacts in personal development, college readiness, leadership abilities, and career success. And I'm really interested in following this up with quantitative research now that we've kind of identified the areas of study. There is a special announcement I want to share. If this was at all interesting to you, check out the next issue of the Journal of Youth Development, because there is going to be an article on state 4-H councils. I'm so excited. And I don't know when they're releasing it yet, sometime in December. I've got another article submitted to the Journal of Human Sciences and Extension, and I'm hoping to hear back from them. It's still being reviewed. And so stay tuned. But if you'll do me one favor, if you'll take out your phone and act like you're going to take a picture of that QR code, that circle, because we have to evaluate everything these days. And if you will act like you're going to take a picture of it, when you put it in your camera, it's going to bring up a website that you can go to. And it would really help me out if you would just fill out about 9 questions really quickly about your level of knowledge in these areas before and after this presentation. And that's one way I'm able to show impact. Are there any questions or comments? I wanted to leave more time for discussion than we have, but we have about 7 minutes. I would love to stop talking and listen to you.
Hi, Brett. I wanted to thank you for sharing all that information. It's great. And I was just wondering, what would be good advice for a completely fledgling local level teen group?
Thanks, Vernell. I think the number one thing I would say is find out what they're interested in and connect with them around their sparks. their deepest interests, because if you can tie it into something that's meaningful to them, they will engage and they will get involved because they are motivated from deep inside to follow those greatest interests. You also want to make sure if you have different types of program delivery, like some people have after school programs as well as the 4-H clubs and spin clubs, try to get representation from all of those different delivery modes on your council built into the DNA, so that it's not just this group or that group that takes over, that it's really for all youth in your county, and all voices matter.
I'm
Thank
curious.
you.
Thanks. I'm curious on that building it into the DNA idea. Like, I appreciate all of your comments related to diversity of many areas on the council and the importance for that. How have you been successful in recruitment and things of that nature?
We were between 4-H directors, and I thought, well, we have a new director coming in. I'm going to try to take the heat so that this new person doesn't have to. And so I really pushed them hard to redo the bylaws so that the urban regions had more members being represented, and more members were, it would represent a wider variety of 4-H youth. It did not go well because these are all youth from monocultural environments. They just did not have a lot of experience with diverse others. They had no perspective on why it's important to have a good mix of people. And on top of that, as I pushed forward, the people in administration above me would go to regional events for extension, and they'd be getting yelled at, and it was creating a lot of pressure way above my head. So when the new director came in, first we worked with the council to create different bylaws and modulate the bylaws, but we kind of had to use positional authority for that. She really had to push it on her authority as the state director. And then since then, they've actually made much more extensive changes. And that's where Samantha comes in. They've kind of, if it was basketball, I'd say it was a rebuild, and they're looking at it from a different perspective now.
That's helpful. I'm going to put a thing in the chat requesting everyone spam me with your council bylaws, because you don't actually have them yet. So thanks.
Sure. Appreciate the questions.
So Brad, one of the things I think about often when we do research or we have an opportunity to look back and reflect, what would you do different now? I mean, now that you have this information, as Samantha is kind of taking over and shifting, is there anything you would have done differently or anything you would have built out with the council in order to address any gaps that you saw or any opportunity areas that you were interested in? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing I would do, because there was, for the bulk of the period, the 13 years I was the advisor or the coordinator, we had much more diversity than we ended up with at the end. There may have been 5 or 6 or 7 youth of color out of 30 versus 2 or 1 out of 40. So during those times, I would really have tried to bring in safeguards to protect and grow that diversity, because those are relationships between the youth were there. And I wouldn't have had to try to explain why it's important, because they knew it, they got it, they were brothers and sisters. So I don't want to say complacency, but I think it's easy to not appreciate what we've got.
As we wrap up, I just want to thank all of you, and I especially want to thank Brad. We don't always do sharing or research, but I think this is a great opportunity, as gives us some time to reflect and think about, and maybe even reach out to Brad if you're thinking about looking into doing some research around or just even evaluation of your programs. So thank you, Brad, for sharing, and I'm inspired.